Welcome. This is episode number 30. Then we call this the On the Blue Line podcast, and this is Monday Morning Roll Call. I am your host and founder, Wayne Mulder, and I am so thankful that you found us, that you're listening to us, that you listen week after week. So thank you so much. I do appreciate it when you like us, follow us, share us, whatever you do on social media, but just tell other people about what we're doing. This is Monday Morning Roll Call, a little 10 to 15 minutes where I just talk about something new and different to get you started for your week. If you would like to hear our interview show, we are getting that started again, and it will release this Thursday, this coming Thursday. So definitely be sure to check that out. Those obviously have been quite popular, and we took a little bit of a break on them, but we have several recorded, and we are getting ready to start again this Thursday. So be looking for it, and we simply call those the interview room. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this started. This week's Monday Morning Roll Call starts now.
On my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for their actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, the community, and the agency I serve.
So every week, I spend some time, just kind of looking up different things that I want to talk about, things that I think may matter to you, and things that you may find interesting. And this week, in the last few weeks, there's been a lot of tragedy in the law enforcement community, and I wanted to talk about something different. I didn't really want to talk about those stories in this format at this time. There's a time to do it, and there's a time not to, and I decided that this week probably wasn't that time. However, as I was going through some different news bulletins and different law enforcement news sources that I look at to prep for these shows, I noticed that there was what I considered an above average list of just crazy stories out there. Some are funny, but some aren't. Some are tragedies, some are sad, but at the end of the day, they're just crazy. So this week I thought I would do something a little bit different. I thought that I would just highlight some of these crazy news stories that have come out across the U.S. I know for me, anyone in law enforcement can tell you stories of sometimes humorous, sometimes just plain crazy calls that they go to. I know when I first got started, we had some crazy ones that came out as a zombie walking down the street and the zombie alligator. Just different crazy calls. And I would come home and I would sit around the dinner table and I would tell those stories to my son. And he would begin laughing hysterically because he thought it was the funniest things, which is nice because as you know, not all stories in law enforcement can be told. Can be told to family members, can be told to children. And sometimes they're things that just aren't appropriate. But those stories were hilarious. And it just highlighted that you never know in law enforcement what you might respond to. So, you come to this new career, be it in law enforcement, maybe you had a previous job, maybe this is your first job, and you decide that law enforcement is something I want to try. Or maybe you've come to this realization that my whole life I want to be a cop. Some people, that's their path as well. So whatever brought you to this path, and you go down and you talk to maybe a local agency, or a lot of states now are doing it where they have regional academies. And then once you go through there and get your state certification, then you can pretty much go on to work at any law enforcement agency within that state using that state certification. So maybe that's your path. And so now you've gone through whatever the academy is. I know when I went through it was 770 hours, but you go through the academy and you get all this training. But what they rarely prepare you for. Now, I had some really good instructors, and I currently teach and so forth, and you do your best, but it isn't until you come out and you're sitting there and your radio goes off or your computer dings and you get this call and you read it over and you're like, what in the world is this? And like most cops, you end up responding to it even if it wasn't your call because you just want to see what in the heck this is all about. Because it's just kind of the nature of what we do. So here's a few stories. Some of these are more interesting than others. The first one is kind of benign, but if you think about it, this one is out of California. So, fortunately, I will preface this by saying the horse is fine. But essentially, it reads like there'd been some sort of birthday party going on. There was this 10-year-old boy, and he was riding this pony last Sunday, and he fell off the horse, and the animal ran away. So then the animal, this small pony, runs away and gets on this very busy interstate. What's crazy is that a driver then clips the animal and doesn't stay, doesn't call police, doesn't notify the authorities. And of course, anyone in law enforcement knows this is not atypical, but they just take off. So now you have a hit and run. Fortunately, someone else stops to tend to the animal. And again, the animal is fine. There's no concerns there. And of course, now they're looking for this driver that decided to hit the animal and take off. But when you think about this call and you think about being in law enforcement, you think about sitting in your car, you're trying to get caught up on reports, and then all of a sudden your computer goes off, your radio goes off, and not only is it a loose pony call, which is probably pretty rare in a very busy area in like Southern California, but it's also running down a freeway, and then moments later it gets hit and nobody stops. I don't know, just a little bit strange, a little bit bizarre. But there's a hierarchy to these. This story I liked. This one's actually out of Missouri, out of Kansas City, Missouri. And what I like the best out of this is the warning, the tweet that the Kansas City Police Department had to put out. So essentially, somebody calls the police because they find belongings that are owned by presumably what they say is a homeless person. So there was a pile of food and clothing and drug paraphernalia, which anyone really in any state anymore, but definitely here in the South, this is not something that's uncommon at all. In fact, in an area that I've spent quite a bit of time in, we have quite a large homeless population. So they find these belongings that belong to a presumably homeless person. What's interesting is on top of these belongings, they find a grenade. So they, of course, do what you would do in law enforcement, which is they block it off. They call out the bomb and arson squad, and they find out that it appears this grenade was actually a live grenade. It wasn't just something that had come from like a military surplus. So the Kansas City Police then puts out a tweet explaining this situation and saying, hey, stay out of this area until we open back up the streets. And then they follow it up saying that it was a hand grenade. It had been modified. And then, quote, it should go without saying, but please don't leave grenades, even inactive ones, just lying around. So I found this quite humorous. But yes, if you have grenades, it would probably be best that you not leave them laying around in public. It could definitely get some interest. And as of right now, they have no leads. They've looked for surveillance cameras and they've searched the area and they have no leads as to who may have left their grenade laying around. But I guess this is a good public service announcement. If perchance you have grenades, maybe don't leave them lying around in public this week. So, on to our third story. So this one's just kind of bizarre, a little sad because there are some animals that have died in this one, but it's just a little bit bizarre. And what I like about this is it really highlights in law enforcement the speculation that goes on. So this is out of Oregon, and they find this dead bull and this what they refer to as a timbered ravine in eastern Oregon. And there was no indication that this bull had been shot, attacked by predators, or had eaten poisonous plants. He's just dead. What they do find is that the animal's sex organs and tongue had been removed and all the blood was gone. Which, as you read through this article, the blood being gone doesn't necessarily mean that insects and so forth hadn't come in and done that. So that in and of itself isn't strange. In the next few days after they find this first dead bull, 4 more Hereford bulls were found within a 1.5 mile radius of that same location. And again, all the same situation, no idea. So ranch management comes out, law enforcement gets involved, and they said, hey, ranch hands, you need to travel in pairs, make sure you're armed, so forth and so on. So when this happens, in typical law enforcement style, they start getting calls from the public. And they start getting emails, and there's all sorts of speculation. Who might be responsible? Who did this? And the theories range from scavengers, such as carrion bugs eating the carcass, to people attacking the animals to cause financial harm to the ranchers. And so then they talk to this guy who's the lead investigator, and they're reaching out to the public, saying, hey, does anyone have any idea how many cases like this have been solved in the past? So all of a sudden, two main theories come out. One is that it's being perpetrated by some sort of cult, and more on that in a minute. And then, of course, there's always these great theories, such as residents speculate that there could be UFO involvement, which I guess with my last name being Mulder, which won't make any sense unless you were an X-Files fan, I had to pay special attention to this case. So residents speculate that there could be UFO involvement. One person suggested that they should look for craters underneath the carcasses, saying it would be evidence, mind you, I'm reading this from the news, evidence that the bulls had been levitated into a spaceship, mutilated, and then dropped back to the ground, and that similar incidents of the past have garnered UFO theories. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what happened, but I like it. I definitely like the theory, and, the truth may be out there. The story goes on. The case recalls mutilations of livestock going all the way back to the 1970s. And back then, there were just as many crazy theories that had came out. Back then, the ranchers began carrying guns. Helicopters had been called out to the kill sites and would check the areas. The FBI got involved. It really became kind of crazy. And the FBI agent, who's now since retired, said that at that time, going back to the 70s now, there was no indication that anything other than common predators were responsible. And then since then, a few sporadic cases have come out. So then they go into some more theories, and they talk about how there are some that believe that this could have been caused to try to create financial harm to the ranch. The only thing with that is that the ranch is drawn pretty much from the local community and is actually now partially owned by a veterinarian that has kind of like an elite destination resort there, as well as the working ranch. And they don't really think that that is probably involved in this. So what do they think happened? Well, for whatever reason, they believe that someone killed them to get the organs of these free-ranging bulls, which makes very little sense to them or to me or to most reasonable person, because you could probably get them for free from a slaughterhouse. So their speculation is that these bulls were darted with a tranquilizer that knocked them out. And then while some people were acting as lookouts, they bled the animals out and then took some of the organs, and potentially could be occult related. And that's what they're looking into. And I have seen in other parts of the country and personally occult related type cases that are similar to this, where you find animal mutilation. But imagine that you're working in law enforcement and this is the call you get. You have dead bulls with anatomy missing and you need to investigate this. Again, you never know what you might be called out to. So, next story. This one is maybe a little bit more explainable given the guy's age, but this one is out of Dallas. 72-year-old Dallas man. And he fatally shot a suspected burglar that was behind his home. So he comes out. It's around 5 o'clock in the morning, and he hears a noise. He hears someone trying to break into a storage shed with a pickaxe. He comes outside and yells to that person, "You need to stop or I'm going to shoot." And this is a very small article, so we don't have a lot of detail. That's really what we know. And so the person, allegedly, according to a later investigation with the guy, takes a few steps towards him, so he fires around. And then later, he says that he fired around into the night, into the direction of where this gentleman ran away. Well, the gentleman dies. And the Dallas man who fired the round went back to bed for a couple hours before calling the police. He, I guess, decided he had better things to do, like get it caught up on his nap rather than calling the police to let him know that he just fired rounds at somebody. And so they ended up picking him up on an arrest warrant the next day. So if perchance you do need to fire rounds, it may be a good idea to call law enforcement at that time. And like I said, these get a little bit more interesting as we go. So the next one that I want to read for you could definitely fall under an only in Florida heading, and it's another one with very little information. But they have identified the female that this week blew up in a porta potty. You did hear that correctly. So they don't know the cause of the explosion, but they're not expecting any kind of foul play. What they know for sure is they get called out to a porta potty that is burning, and they get there and they end up finding human remains. And it took them a little while to identify the person, but she did live down the street from this house. The house is under construction, and the homeowner stated that there was no reason for anyone to be at the house. And they don't know much more than that. They've tried to look for any types of explosives and so forth and haven't found anything. There's some theories, such as maybe lighting a cigarette and the possibility of built up gas that ended up exploding. And that's all we know. But again, think of yourself in law enforcement. If you're in law enforcement, you've probably been to similar calls. And this comes out. We have an explosion of a porta potty. You show up thinking maybe it's juveniles, whatever, something crazy, and it ends up crazier when you find human remains. So, speaking of gas, and I will end with this one, a man passes gas during strip search. This is not out of the U.S., this is out of Scotland. But this gentleman, he ends up in a car crash, and the officers show up, and they end up smelling marijuana. Marijuana possession is illegal in Scotland, and it can be punishable by fine or prison time. So they handcuff the guy, they take him down to the station, and he's screaming, acting aggressively. He's just not happy. And he was booked and then strip searched because of the drug charge. So, according to the article, Cook passed wind intentionally multiple times. And this is a quote, so I'm going to read this. Cook deliberately farted in the direction of the officer 3 times. Stating, "How do you like that?" according to the prosecutor and according to the report. So he ends up pleading guilty to the possession charge as well as behaving in a threatening or abusive manner. His punishment? 75 hours of community service. So hopefully he will learn that it was very rude and, in Scotland, abusive to pass gas intentionally towards law enforcement during a strip search. So that does it for these crazy stories this week. If you're in law enforcement, you could probably provide a lengthy list of similar events yourself. Craziness that you've gone to, things that you've seen. If you're thinking of getting into law enforcement and are currently in the academy or you're thinking about it, I can tell you there are few other careers like this one. Few other ones where you're going to see these kind of things or just the bizarre calls that you go to. If you're a civilian, this gives you a glimpse into the world that law enforcement operates in. I spent most of my life before law enforcement blissfully naive. I had no concept, no idea. I'd go to bed at night and sleep comfortably in my bed, not knowing the craziness that was going on outside my doors. Yes, I saw the news. I saw national issues. Now, remember when I was growing up, 24-hour news cycles were just starting, and the whole news at your fingertips like we have now did not exist. So I really didn't pay that much attention to it unless, someone at work would say, "Hey, did you hear?" And of course, you'd have to hear the story. And typically I hadn't heard whatever it was. Law enforcement has the benefit of seeing the world that needs help. Think about that. Law enforcement sees the world that needs help. That's why they're calling. Law enforcement is getting the phone call because people need help. So that's the world that they see. They see the people that are calling because they're in distress, those that are in fear, those that have questions, those that have no idea what they need, those that have bizarre things going on. I've received calls for sprinkler systems not turning off in the wee hours of the morning. I've never in my life thought of calling law enforcement because my sprinklers didn't turn off, but people do. I've responded. So whatever it is, there's all sorts of things people call for. How to do this, how to do that. Things that have nothing to do with law or order. So this week, I hope you have the opportunity to see the humor, the concern, the crazy that the law enforcement profession and their everyday job sees. Hopefully, when you see a news story or you hear a story around the water cooler this week and it seems too crazy to be true, what you will think and what I want you to think is that somewhere in this world, somebody with a badge is responding to it. They're going out there to investigate it, to sort it all out. And if you are that somebody, please be safe out there. And everyone, I hope you have a great week. So that does it for this week's Monday Morning Roll Call. Please check out the show notes for links to our website and other resources. I thank you for listening. Have a great week. I'll see you next Monday at Roll Call, and in the meantime, I'll see you out there on the blue line.